Good afternoon and welcome. This is Brian Ross, Chief Investigative Correspondent for the Law&Crime Network. And for our viewers on Facebook and YouTube, this is a special report from the Law&Crime Network about the law and the coronavirus. What are your rights? What can happen to your job? What can happen to your employment? What can happen to your residence? Lots of questions in these troubling and uncertain times, with more than 1,000 Americans now dead, and the death toll rising every single day, and millions of people facing unemployment and financial hardship. Joining us to talk about all this, first from New Haven, Connecticut, the host of the Law&Crime Daily Debrief, Aaron Keller, who is a lawyer himself, and from Arlington, Virginia, Tom Spiegel, a lawyer who focuses on employment and workplace issues. And as you can tell, we're nowhere near our Law&Crime studios in New York City, instead operating from our homes and remote locations, and our producers and our technical staff also carrying out a miraculous job of getting us on the air this afternoon for this special report from their homes all across the tri-state area. Tom Spiegel, let me start with you. How are you doing down there?
We're doing fine. Like a lot of people, we're all working from home. And in Virginia, the governor issued an order that all non-essential businesses be closed and closed a lot of public spaces, which I think was the right call. So we're hunkered down, but fortunately, my family is a bit stir crazy, at least healthy. So thankful for that.
Very good. And Aaron, up in New Haven?
Same for me as it is for you, Brian. So this is a two-sided issue for us here at Law&Crime, because even if we were to go into the city, the criminal court system is mostly shut down. So we don't have live trials to bring our usual viewers. From my perspective, because I also work on lawandcrime.com, there is just so much to research, with new laws being passed by Congress to deal with the coronavirus, and also many state laws to deal with how to handle pandemics like this. This is an area of law that most of us at Law&Crime have not had a chance to dig into, and perhaps in some states hasn't been dug into in many decades. I found laws going back to 1907 that are still on the books in Massachusetts, and I believe there's another state where almost the entire health code when it comes to pandemics dates back to 1940. So there are plenty of questions about whether or not American law is up to the challenge of dealing with this, and we've been digging into those issues on lawandcrime.com.
And Tom and Aaron are both here to answer your questions. And a reminder, this is not legal advice. If you actually have a legal issue, you need to find a lawyer and find one soon to deal with your issues. But we can help you understand what your rights might be. And we want you to send in your question to us at Facebook Live or YouTube Live on the chat section. And Tom, let me start with you. You wrote the book, You're Pregnant, You're Fired. Can you get fired for having the coronavirus?
Well, just as Aaron suggested, the law is changing a lot. So the answer depends. I would say generally the answer is no. Your employer can't fire you for having coronavirus. However, an employer could require you to stay at home and stay away from the workplace in order to protect other workers.
And Tom, are you already hearing from potential clients about issues that are coming up because of the uncertainty and the crisis?
Yes, every day we are getting people calling our office with all kinds of questions. You know, can I get fired for not wearing? Can my employer require me to wear a mask at work? Can my employer make me go home because I won't take my mask off? Leave law. All kinds of issues related to coronavirus are coming up.
And are there easy answers to those questions, Tom?
Unfortunately, no. There are very few easy answers, as I'm sure Aaron will attest. The law is a moving target now, particularly as states and localities are getting involved. We have some guidance. I mean, the law still applies, so we can look at court guidance and federal agency guidance. But there are very few easy answers these days when it comes to legal matters.
And Aaron, let me ask you, you've been taking a look at the OSHA laws, the Occupational Safe and Health Administration laws. What do they pertain to here? What do they show us?
So I've been looking at this through the lens of what the federal government and what Congress has been doing in relation to what the states are doing. And Tom's completely right. This is a rapidly changing area of law. For instance, we keep hearing from the White House that many protections are coming to American workers, like paid sick leave, and also an expansion of the Family Medical Leave Act, so you can care for someone in your family. Well, those protections don't kick in until the 2nd of next month. So there's a gap between now and then where those protections are not yet in the law books. And also, you have a general rule, as you do in many laws, with these wonderful sounding promises coming out of Washington to protect workers' rights, but there are exceptions. And some of them apply to businesses of fewer than 50 workers. Some of them apply to businesses that have less than 500 workers. So the protections do not apply to every single employee out there. And so if you have a specific issue, you need to call your own local attorney, and you need to call quickly, because in some cases there are statutes of limitations that prevent you from taking action after a certain amount of time. As it comes to the OSHA regulations, Brian, here's the thing. The president was at the podium over the weekend and made a comment that really riled up a lot of people in the healthcare industry and many patients, certainly, where he said part of the problem with procuring the number of masks that medical professionals are asking for is because doctors take the masks off and they throw them away when they're done. And normally there's a ready supply of masks for doctors to do that so that they can treat one patient and then throw away a mask and get a new, safe, sterile mask for the next patient. Well, I started digging into that a little bit, and the OSHA regulations, again, have a general rule, and then they have exceptions. We've got a piece up on lawandcrime.com that discusses this. I encourage people to read it. Generally, to the president's comments, employers can make people sanitize their masks. And that was a bit of a shock to me. I thought the law would be a little bit more clear about this because, again, the president said maybe the masks can be sanitized. He was making a correct statement under the law. But again, you have to get into the details. The masks can't be sanitized if the procedure makes the masks less effective, and masks have to be thrown away if they're dirty. This is a very complex law, and you can envision almost an unlimited number of possibilities that would get into it. And even the regulations themselves speak to the possibility that there might not be enough medical equipment or enough protective gear in the medical industry. So even OSHA and even some other federal agencies have sent out directives or guidance documents. They're not officially the law. They don't have the force of law, but they basically say if you're running short, you may have to reuse things. That's a bit of a sobering reminder. I would have hoped as a human being that the law would be stronger in that area. This virus is opening up a lot of questions about what are our laws and could they be better?
Exactly. Aaron and Tom, the White House has just announced that the president and the White House are going to categorize counties in the country, across the country, as high risk, medium risk, or low risk, and allow each county by county to determine what can be shut down, what can be opened. And as you know, many businesses, non-essential business, have been ordered closed. But we have a question from one of our viewers asking, can a non-essential business who refuses to close their doors be arrested or jailed? Tom, Aaron, can a non-essential business who doesn't close the doors be arrested or jailed?
I'll start and let Aaron follow up with what he knows about it. I think it depends on the state, what the states have done in terms of giving agencies enforcement power for these decisions. So if a state has given law enforcement the ability to come in and give citations, and probably in rare cases arrest businesses that are considered essential or that are considered non-essential that refuse to close. But as Aaron mentioned, the guidance on this is all over the map and is often very unclear. I would be surprised. I mean, things may change, and obviously they're changing daily. But up until this point, I would be surprised if there were any states where we had law enforcement who were going through and arresting business owners that they consider to be non-essential, because the guidance on what counts as an essential or non-essential business is very unclear.
Aaron, what can you add?
I agree with Tom on this. This is very state specific. One issue that I looked at, which has come up recently, is, for instance, can gun shops be considered essential businesses and can they not? And that's all over the map as well. In some states, they are as a Second Amendment function, and in other states, they're not. So this is a very state specific question. It's a question that's best posed to an attorney directly in that state. The powers are going to be different in each state. In states, you've got local authorities that have power, you have governors who have power, and you also have health commissioners, health departments, and other public health officials who have their own powers to enforce quarantines and isolations. Generally speaking, a quarantine order is an order that's issued against someone that's exposed to a contagion. An isolation order in many locales, but not in all locales, an isolation order is different. That's if you actually have symptoms and you have actually contracted the situation. So a highly specific local question and no easy answer to it.
Absolutely. Like many of these questions, you're watching a special report from the Law and Crime Network with questions from you about what are your legal rights during this troubling and uncertain times because of the coronavirus, with our special guest, Aaron Keller, the host of the Law and Crime Daily Debrief, and with Tom Spiegel, who's a lawyer who focuses on employment issues working out of Arlington, Virginia. And Tom, let me ask you this about employment. What do you tell employers? What should they do about trying to lay off staff, cut back on staff, cut back on salaries?
Well, I only represent employees, so if I would say call your friendly management side attorney, because many employers have somebody that they rely on, and they better have them on speed dial these days. I will say generally employers have wide latitude to lay off workers, to reduce salary. There are some limitations, clearly, particularly for higher level executives. If you have a contract with the employee that requires you to pay a certain salary, you could be limited by that. There's something called the WARN Act, where that regulates companies that engage in large layoffs. They have to provide certain notice to their employees. So there are some limitations, but generally employers have broad power. They've got to run a business, and if the money's not coming in and they can't afford to make payroll, then they have the ability, the legal ability to reduce salaries, to let people go. And they can't do it in a discriminatory way, but as long as they're not, generally they have the authority to do that.
And Tom, here's another question from one of our viewers. Can I be fired if I don't go to work because I'm scared, but my business is considered essential? Can I be fired for refusing to go to work because I'm scared?
In most instances, yes. Most instances, a requirement of your job is that you show up and you do it. And being scared alone is not enough. Now, it would be different if you have symptoms. If you're scared that you're worried that you might infect others, then there might be some protections for you there. And again, this can vary state by state and locality by locality. But I would say broad strokes, in most instances, simply being afraid is not going to be reason enough to protect you from losing your job.
Here's another question that really isn't workplace, but both you and Aaron perhaps can weigh in. What happens if my landlord says, I'm kicking you out because you tested positive for the virus and you're a threat to other people in your building?
Aaron, you want to start with that one? You want me to take
Okay, I'll start with what I know. And again, this is another situation where the law is quickly evolving in this area, and it's highly specific right down to the county level, because many housing codes and housing rules are down at the state and county levels. Now, federally, we know that there are anti-discrimination laws that deal with housing. And one of them says you can't discriminate against someone because of a disability. There's a Department of Justice publication that was put out just a few years ago, back in 2017, that raises the question as to whether or not a virus infection, and the example the publication raises is the HIV, would count as a disability. And the advice that it gives, and I've got some of the language in front of me, is that it may count as a disability. So even the Department of Justice is looking at this and interpreting it to saying that the law isn't really clear. The DOJ also says in the circular that there is no protection under federal housing law for someone who is a direct threat to a person or the property of others. So that gets into a really sticky situation where if you're someone who's leasing from a landlord and you have roommates who may be infected, again, this is all just hypothetically speaking. Again, does the federal law necessarily provide protection there? Even the Department of Justice is saying that it's unclear. It's clear that there's no protection for that sort of thing, but then what if it's considered a disability by a judge who's looking at an individual case? So that's sort of where I started my look at this, Tom. You can jump in from here.
Yeah, that's exactly right. Under Fair Housing Act law, which tracks the Americans with Disabilities Act, generally, flu or flu-like conditions or an episodic type infection is not going to be considered a disability under the act. However, getting to your point, Aaron, about it being very, very specific case by case, if it complicates underlying symptoms, long-term symptoms, asthma, multiple sclerosis, cancer, if it exacerbates those, then it could be considered a disability, and a workplace or a landlord could have restrictions on what they could do in terms of firing you. If you're your landlord, could you evict someone? But again, there's a large carve out. If you're a clear danger to others, and again, this is where it's changing daily as to, if you have coronavirus, are you a clear danger to others? We're learning more and more about that every day. We don't know even some very basic science that we're still struggling with right now about how the virus is spread from one to the other. So I think we'll see. I think a lot of this is going to end up in the courts, because these situations will come up, and you're going to have landlords and employers arguing that look, while the ADA or the FHA provides these protections, this person was a clear danger, and so I had to take this action.
Absolutely. It's still evolving. Another question to follow up on that. Do I have the right to know if a neighbor or somebody I work with has tested positive? Do I have a right to know the identity of that person?
I'll start, and Aaron, you can jump in. Generally, the answer is no. Certainly in the workplace, you have privacy protections for your medical conditions, which would be considered one. The Americans with Disabilities Act, again, requires employers to keep health-related information actually in a separate file and to keep that confidential. HIPAA as well can provide confidentiality protection. So an employer is not going to disclose that, nor should they. An employee is not entitled to know. I would say the same. Your neighbor, certainly you're not entitled. Nobody can force that neighbor to tell you whether they're infected or not. So those privacy laws are usually going to protect those kinds of disclosures.
And I'll jump in here, Tom. So I agree with your assessment that privacy laws, which again are wildly different state to state, are going to play a role in how issues like this are judged. But there are a couple of odd state idiosyncrasies to this that I dug up. One of my areas of research has been to look at the health codes of as many of the 50 states as I can. I haven't gotten through all of them yet, but I've gotten through a lot of them. And we've got an article up on lawandcrime.com that deals with some of America's strangest or quirkiest quarantine laws. And this is a good point to bring some of them up here, because in at least 2 states that I've found thus far, the health authorities have the ability to post placards on houses where there are people who are infected with some sort of a contagion or a public health threat or something of that nature. So I found it in Vermont. I found it in Ohio thus far. There may be other states as well. Not all states have this, but some states do. And then the question is, will the public health authorities actually go so far as to carry that out? Because it says, if I'm remembering this properly, and I'd have to go double check it to be sure, but that they can do it, but I don't think that it says they have to do it. So a lot of this is going to wind up falling into the nitty-gritty authorities of the public health officials, be it a state board of health or some other health official within a state, or sometimes even in a county. And the laws are really all over the place on this. In Ohio, for instance, Tom, I know this would hit your radar. There's a specific statute that I found in Ohio, and I haven't found it anywhere else yet. But in Ohio, the employer of an undocumented immigrant can be held legally liable if an undocumented immigrant spreads a disease. That's in the Ohio statutes. Well, I've not found anything else similar to it anywhere else. But you have these little idiosyncrasies in the different states all across the country. In Massachusetts, if you're quarantined by the health officials, you can receive a $2 a day salary. Why $2 a day? It dates all the way back to 1907. It's still on the books, and it hasn't been updated. So we also have another state where I found that if the hospitals get stressed, the public health authorities can actually start setting up hospitals in vacant houses. They can go into vacant houses and set up medical facilities, and that's how that state deals with it. So the differences across the states really are quite shocking in some senses. The penalties for violating quarantines are all over the place as well. A $10 fine in one state, it's a $15,000 fine in another state. It's 6 months behind bars in one state, and it's up to 5 years in prison in another state. So highly specific, again, back to the local level for many of these.
And if I can
Aaron,
just
that's
jump,
just amazing research. Here's a question coming in from our viewers. Go ahead, Tom. Sorry.
no, yeah, I was going to jump in there and say, that's fascinating. $2 a day. I mean, if Starbucks was still open, you could get yourself a cup of coffee with that, right? But then the other issue is enforcement of those laws, right? I'm sure all of them have you've got to have due process rights to contest that, right? And they come to nail a placard up on your door to say, hey, you got the wrong house, or I'm not infected. But as we talked about, earlier on the show, a lot of these courts are running with skeleton crews. They're only dealing with serious felony matters now. Who would hear this? What body is going to adjudicate those real time as that's happening? So that's another issue that those laws raise. In addition to, the penalties being all over the place, is who's going to enforce them, and how are you going to, what courts are going to be the ones to resolve disputes about them?
Without a doubt. You're watching a special report from the Law&Crime Network for our YouTube and Facebook Live viewers, answering your questions about the law and the coronavirus with Aaron Keller, the host of the Law&Crime Daily Debrief, and Tom Spiegel, a lawyer who focuses on employment issues in Virginia. Here's a question that's come in from a viewer in Washington. I'm in Washington State. We've been closed off by the governor. I have family in Oregon 2 hours away that are homeless. I worry and want to take them in. What are my rights?
And the right to take them in? That's a very good question. Aaron, have you run across that in any of your research about the various states and how they're handling this?
Well, here's what jumps out in my mind immediately in this. I can't say exactly whether or not the state might take an enforcement action. Again, this is one of those highly specific questions that really needs to go to a local attorney, and I would make the call quickly because it's something that needs an immediate answer, and somebody there should be able to answer it a heck of a lot better than I can because I'm not over there in those states. What I will say on top of that, though, is that once you talk about crossing state lines, you start triggering federal jurisdictions. Federal quarantine jurisdiction applies when people start crossing state lines. And that's something to consider speaking about with a local attorney there who can help look at those specific state actions and executive orders compared with the the exact powers of the health departments in those states. For instance, one piece that I wrote on lawandcrime.com is that if the federal government wanted to deal with the people traveling to Florida to go party on spring break, this has caused a huge uproar with spring breakers, some of them saying they don't care about the coronavirus. That's a situation where the federal government could, if it wanted to, jump in because that's when federal power can be exercised. Tom, I'm not sure if there's much more you could add to that.
No, that's absolutely right. Before I opened my own firm, I was a federal prosecutor, and you're right. As soon as you start crossing state lines in anything, then you bring in federal jurisdiction, and you've got a whole new raft of potential penalties, not to mention the heavy hand of the federal government. So I think your advice is good. Call a local lawyer in Washington who handle these matters to get specific advice about that.
Great. We're getting lots of questions in. Another one, Tom. Can people that are still working get hazardous pay right now? Do they deserve it? Can they apply for it?
Yeah, it's a great question. Do they deserve it? Sure. I think we all would like to, get paid for working in dangerous situations. I think it would, this kind of pay is usually reserved for people in law enforcement, military, firefighters, maybe some public health workers, and it's going to be part of their contract already. So for those of us in the private sector, which are the vast majority of employees, you're not going to have a right to hazard or danger pay as much as you might deserve it.
I agree with what Tom said. This is largely going to come down to a contract matter between the employee and the employer, if there is a contract. But we have heard from the food services industry, the grocery stores, several chains have voluntarily turned around and said, we are giving everyone a raise because we need you right now. And this is one of those situations in law, Tom, I think, where, you can have a carrot and a stick approach. You can try to basically force someone to do something, but the better way to get people to do things is to reward them. And we have seen companies voluntarily step up and offer additional pay for workers who are out there trying to keep the shelves stocked so the rest of us don't run out of essentials. And just my personal opinion, but that's commendable. So we have seen companies step up and perhaps do the unexpected.
Absolutely agree.
Aaron, here's a question along that same. Let me follow up with a question, Aaron, along that same line from one of our viewers. Does a local mayor have jurisdiction over national corporations, such as Bank of America, to enforce stay-at-home orders for a national corporation? Who trumps who?
My gut read of that would be that the local mayor has the ability to deal with situations within his or her jurisdiction. And if a company is operating in that jurisdiction, and again, this is just a completely off the cuff read of that, mayors and local health officials have the legal power to enforce, pursuant to their legal duties, orders in their jurisdictions. In New York, for instance, local authorities have the ability to enact a state of emergency for up to 3 months, and it can be extended for 3 months after that. In the state level, if the governor so chooses, or if multiple local jurisdictions do state of emergency, the governor can declare a state of disaster. Local governments have what we say in this federal system, the police power. They're the ones that can take care of things in their jurisdiction. They have general police powers within their jurisdiction. The federal government is of limited jurisdiction. Things like interstate commerce, national defense, the national currency. So a local mayor can't generally reach over and deal with something in another jurisdiction, but can deal with things within his or her borders. So, Tom, do you agree or disagree?
I mean, that's exactly right. The only thing I would add to that is that in some states, there's something called the Dillon Rule. At least to know that's what it's called in North Carolina. And I think similar states have similar restrictions where counties and localities only have power to act where it's specifically enumerated under state law. So you may recall this came up in Charlotte, North Carolina, when they passed what was called the bathroom bill a number of years ago about, labeling bathrooms for use for transgender. And the state of North Carolina came in and said, no, Mecklenburg County, I believe it was the city of Charlotte, you're outside of your authority to act as a locality because we as the state have not given you that. And they overturned that. So I think it, again, depends on the state. But as a general matter, I think you're exactly right, Aaron.
We're about to wrap up, and I wanted to ask each of you just to give your best thoughts to people who do have legal issues in 30 seconds. What's their best course of action right now in these times when the courts are shut down and everything is up in the air?
Okay, sure. Okay, so here's the thing, folks. I mean, we're trying to research as best we can to wrap our heads around these issues. But if you have a pressing legal issue, again, local law firms are staying open. I've been talking to my friends in law firms around the country. I'm hearing from wills, trusts, and estates attorneys that they're helping clients write their wills. And again, lawyers are always trying to be prepared. And it's just horrible to think of the deaths that are happening out there. But lawyers are remotely helping clients write wills. And the standards for that are vastly different state to state. Hearing that there are attorneys running around trying to help doctors and nurses in states like Pennsylvania. And so, look, the disruption of this pandemic is certainly apparent in the legal industry. But I know a lot of attorneys that are out there. They're picking up the phone. They're working late. They're engaging with their clients. They're trying to answer as many questions as they can in a swiftly moving legal landscape where there are so many moving parts. We've got the White House coming into things. We've got executive orders at the federal level. We've got Congress. We've got local authorities playing a role in this. There's some cooperation. There's some competition. There's some butting of heads with a situation of this. But it all goes back to a lot of those local attorneys on the front line. If you've got a question, if you're worried about your job, if you're worried about your livelihood, if you're worried about discrimination, call those folks. They're there. I would
absolutely agree with that. Yeah, I think, and also, great resources like Law&Crime. You guys are putting out some really good information. Our website, www.spiegellaw.com. We've got a whole page on COVID related employment issues. Website for employees that have questions or are looking for counsel is the National Employment Lawyers Association. Their website is NELA.org, and they have an attorney locator there, which is, again, nationwide, which is very good. And I agree with Aaron there. I see on my Facebook page and other attorney groups that I'm in, attorneys making themselves available for, reduced fee or no cost consultations, staying open late hours, trying to be there to help folks that have questions. So I think you'll find a lot of attorneys out there available to take calls.
Thank you, Tom Spiegel, very much, a lawyer in Arlington, Virginia, specializing in the workplace and employment issues, focusing on workplace and employment issues. And Aaron Keller from New Haven, Connecticut, the host of the Law and Crime Daily Debrief, also a lawyer. Excellent advice, very thoughtful research, and great answers. Thanks for sending all your questions to us. We're going to continue to produce special reports like this, going into your questions about legal issues, as well as special reports to bring you up to date on the various court trials we've been following, which are all now suspended across the country. We'll keep you posted on what's coming up here on Law and Crime on our special report. And you can follow us on social media to keep track of when we're going to be up next with our reports. On Twitter at Law and Crime News and at Law Crime Network, on Facebook at Law and Crime, and on Instagram at Law and Crime. This is Brian Ross reporting from my studio in Sharon, Connecticut. Thanks for joining us, and have a good afternoon and be safe.